Greetings and welcome to AmericaTV.me, powered by you. Thank you. Today we're going to focus on the race for equity, the urgency of now. This morning at Como Park, um, the Element Boxing and Fitness organized a race for equity. It was so great to see so many people gathered to focus attention on the urgency of now. And you'll hear in a little while Dalton Outlaw share his vision about why the race for equity. Also, in this program, we're going to talk about some of these tough issues of our time around disparities in employment, disparities in access to capital. These are front page news today. And why, at this time in Minnesota's history, we cannot do anything about it. In other words, right now there's a $9 billion surplus in the legislature, and community leaders are asking for the governor and the legislators to allocate $2 billion into a trust fund for long term wealth building of the ALANA BIPOC communities. So, more of that later. So, let's first hear about the race for equity. AmericaTV.me, powered by you. We are watching the race for equity, Element Boxing. Yes, the race has begun with a number of people. Yeah, Dalton, could you tell us a little bit about the race for equity?
Yes, I can. So the Race for Equity is our second annual event. This event is to bring awareness to our programming, but also equality, equity, and opportunity. Opportunity, in our sense, being opportunity for all races, abilities, all genders to be active, to be included in opportunities like this through our 5K event, through walk runs, through exercise, through fitness, through boxing, through dance, through arts, and all the things that we provide here at our Commotion Center for Movement. So if you'd like to learn more about what we do in the community, you can look us up on the web at commotioncenter.org or elementgym.org, both of our community organizations. We're excited to be here. We're excited to be running this event.
So why the urgency of now?
Now is the time. We've been doing this work for over 11 years, but we got to continue to provide opportunities now and forever. Um, Obviously, with the current climate of what's going on in the world, we need to come together rather than separate ourselves. So we want to provide opportunities and ways for us to come together. And this is a great opportunity to get people out moving, walking, and exercising, and building longevity and health.
Yeah, thank you. Today's newspaper is very poignant because of the issues. Show people about what's going on. Yeah, there are people running, all of them running for equity. Uh, Today's paper talked about disparities in mortgage rates, in racial gap in mortgage rates. We have a legislature that has a $9 billion surplus, and they're not choosing to invest long term. We have issues and the abilities to do things. And here, people at Como Lake this morning, they are doing something in their part. Something. And the question is, what are we doing and what are our leaders doing to help close the gap? So tune in a little later today on AmericaTV.me. We will focus on some of these issues and talk about them. And thanks for watching. AmericaTV.me, powered by you. Let's hope we all come. So that was a very powerful event. a run for a race for equity, symbolizing that the urgency of now. Next, I want to focus on um, dimensions of this race for equity. I appreciate the vision and the energy of Dalton and Lacey Outlaw and Element Box and Fitness and everybody who showed up this morning. The paper today had a front headline about racial disparities in mortgage lending in the Twin Cities. And this is data from our very own Twin Cities after controlling a lot of factors and bringing in new analysis. The Federal Reserve Bank and analysts documented disparities in lending. So, what can we do about it? One event, one action that we heard today recently was the launch of a black-owned bank in Minnesota, the first black-owned bank in Minnesota, and we had a panel on America TV.me to talk about it. So, I'm going to share with you what we heard from some of our community perspectives earlier this week. Greetings and welcome to America TV.me, and thank you for joining us, a TV powered by you. In our last program, I talked about the $1.4 trillion ALANA, African, Latino, Asian, and Native American economy. And that message went out through a very diverse group of communities in Minnesota because that documented the power of this huge economy, bigger than the economy of Mexico, and the need to invest in this economy, especially in this legislative session when there's a huge budget surplus. Today, we want to focus on the first Black owned bank in Minnesota that was launched last week, the First Independence Bank. And you might wonder, why do we have a Black owned bank in Minnesota? What's the potential? I want to share with you some key facts that will help put this in context. So, uh, when you look at the Black economy, there's a $16 billion Black economy in Minnesota. And this uh, comprises of $7 billion in buying power, residential real estate of about $6 billion. That's a lot of mortgages. Uh, Businesses, Black owned businesses that have about a $1.7 billion in sales, so a lot of business accounts. These businesses have an annual payroll of $515 million with monthly rental payments of renters too, accounting for $80 million a month. So this is a huge $16 billion Black economy in Minnesota. And it's about time that a financial institution has been launched. It took a long time that could tap into this market because this market has been, as you know, underserved because there is been issues about access to capital and the inability of businesses and homeowners and others to access capital in Minnesota. So today I have two people that will join us to provide some perspective on the launch of this first Black-owned bank in Minnesota. I have Kavita Kumar, who's a reporter for the Star Tribune, and Connie Sheehan, who's the owner of Push Fitness. So first, let me have Kavita Kumar on screen, and we will uh, have her perspective on the launch of this bank because she's been covering it for a long time. So, Kavita, tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Yeah, hi Bruce. Thanks for having me. My name is Kavita Kumar, and I'm a reporter at the Star Tribune where I write about the economy and about financial services.
So, you've been covering the story on the First Independence Bank, and from what I read, it took a village for this bank to come about. So, Can you share what you found out? How did this bank launch?
Yeah, so think back to the first few weeks after George Floyd was murdered. A lot of companies were thinking about how they could do better about on different racial equity measures, and it brought together a group of the Twin Cities banking executives who normally don't necessarily collaborate together. They decided to come together to brainstorm ideas for how they could maybe come together to address some of the racial inequity equity issues in the Twin Cities region, apart from their own initiatives that each bank was already working on. And as they were brainstorming, one thing that they all, that surfaced to the top was this idea that there wasn't a Black-owned bank in town. And so they saw it as a hole in the local financial ecosystem. So they reached out to First Independence Bank in Detroit, with whom some of them had a relationship, and talked to the CEO there. And they found out from that conversation that First Independence was interested, had been wanting to expand for years. But Black-owned banks are pretty small comparatively, and there's only 16 left in the U.S. And they've been historically undercapitalized, so they don't have a ton of resources. And in this today's banking landscape, it's very competitive. You see a lot of consolidation, costs are rising, so it's harder for these smaller banks to survive on their own. So, but they found a interesting potential partner in First Independence Bank, who was interested in expanding to Minnesota. So they helped, offer a lot of resources and help to First Independence to help it expand to the Twin Cities. That included offering up a former Wells Fargo branch there on University Avenue that Wells Fargo had recently shuttered. It offered a way for the bank to get up and running really quickly. It was already a former bank, so they didn't have to rebuild a whole new space and can get it up and running quickly. It had a drive-through, which, as you know, like in the Twin Cities, it's hard to build a place with a new drive-through, especially Minneapolis. They also offered to sell it loans to help build up its book of assets, so it could have an immediate revenue stream. Because that's always, these small banks don't have the marketing budgets of a JP Morgan Chase, right? That can flood the market with marketing to try to start business flowing. So they helped get it build a book of assets so we could have a little bit more financial stability to get it going. And those are just a few of the ways that they helped out.
That's great. It takes a village to make something happen at times. And then you had PPL, Project and Pride and Living, that owns the building, according to your reporting, that is actually the landlord, right?
Yeah, right. So Wells Fargo ended up donating the property to Project for Pride and Living, who was in turn leasing it at a very nominal rate to First Independence Bank. And they kind of figured out this relationship so they wouldn't have to deal with some of the tax issues and other financial liability of owning the property themselves. So, and eventually down the road, Project for Pride and Living is hoping to do some sort of other development on that site. But for the first few years at least, it'll just be mostly a First Independence Bank branch there.
Thank you. You've been listening to Kavita Kumar, reporter for the Star Tribune, who's been covering the launch of the first Black-owned bank in Minnesota. And we're going to come back to you, Kavita. I want to bring in a new a business owner who will talk to us about what does this mean uh, to her in the launch of this new first Black-owned bank. So, introducing to you Connie Sheehan, the owner of Push Fitness. Thanks for joining us, Connie. Could you tell us a little bit about Push Fitness and yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, Bruce. I appreciate it. So I'm Connie Sheehan, and I own Push Fitness. Push Fitness is actually not very far from this first Black-owned bank in Minnesota, which is so exciting. So we are in the Midway area, and it's a small boutique fitness center, and we offer all kinds of workout opportunities, and we are geared toward women of color, and that is our focus. Everyone is welcome at Push, but that is our focus, is on women of color.
Yeah, you do a good job. I know my wife was part of the team, and
Right.
and uh, right through COVID, you've been having that business go strong. And I know when COVID hit, a lot of businesses, including Black-owned businesses, were severely hit because of access to capital. And so then the SBA launched this PPP program that was supposed to save the small business. But we know that it had challenges in Minnesota. It was not reaching people. So tell us your experience with the PPP program.
Well, I applied for it and needed it, definitely needed it, because my revenue was down and it was just a hard time. So I applied for it, and Bruce, I would get emails saying, "Okay, it's coming, it's available," and then I get information from a bank saying, "Ah, we don't have enough money. Try again." So there are multiple banks that I tried to go through to get the loan. I actually ended up speaking with a family member in Chicago to see if there was any way that he could help me out, and he was overwhelmed as well. And so the way that it finally came through is that the Neighborhood Development Center reached out to me and said, "This is now available, Connie. If you act now, you can get it." And Bruce, if they hadn't reached out to me, I know that I would have missed that deadline. So I was so appreciative that they told me when the window was open, and then I quickly got all of my paperwork in, which was ready. I was just waiting for the opportunity. But I'm such a firm believer that if they hadn't reached out to me, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. And they
Yeah,
knew me. Yeah.
yeah, I remember that there was a the SBA suddenly announced on a Wednesday there was a 3 hour window
Mhm.
that someone could apply for a small businesses could apply, and that when a lot of people like you got in.
Mhm.
So a moral of the story is that when there is access, our businesses, Alana African, Latino, Native American businesses, will take advantage of the opportunity. And you
Mhm.
got that access, you took the opportunity, you got your loan, you're still functioning,
Mhm.
uh, got through COVID and doing well. So that is an important lesson about access and opportunity.
Yeah.
And so let us bring back Kavita too to talk a little bit more. But you've been listening to Connie Sheehan, an owner of Push Fitness. So check her out for all your wellness and fitness needs.
Mhm.
So now let's bring in Kavita. And so both of you have seen the need of a black-owned bank in Minnesota. So Connie, what how do you think such a bank might serve you?
So, Bruce, I think I'll just add in, I can answer your question by adding in to what you just mentioned, the moral of the story. I think the moral of the story is that I was known, I was seen. And I think that happens when there are people like me. That's why I opened Push. I wanted people to be able to come to a place where they felt comfortable, where they could be seen. And I think I would feel comfortable going with a Black owned business and they would see me and know me. And so I think it's a huge benefit. Kavita mentioned it's a smaller bank. I would feel like it's more community focused, and they would know me a little bit more. So I feel strongly about that. That you are known and you are seen with people like yourselves. So
And that's incidentally, Connie, that's behind America TV.me.
mm,
I would like people to see themselves on this TV, be accessible to it, and should be powered by individuals who see it. So
mhm,
they, in turn, through their social media outlets, get the word out
mhm,
and power this human-centered media.
mhm.
So we're all on the same page here,
Yes.
and I'm glad you brought that up. We need to be seen, and we need to
Mhm,
see ourselves
mhm.
in America. Um,
Yep.
uh, Kavita, what are your insights on how this first black-owned bank could serve us?
Well, first of all, the Twin Cities has one of the worst disparities in terms of home ownership, racial disparities in home ownership. So I know that's going to be a really big focus of First Independence Bank, um, working in that area. And, as Connie said, I think there's a cultural competency that comes with like walking to a bank and seeing people who look like you, and seeing a diversity there and being in a place where diversity is really welcomed. And so, I think all of us in the Twin Cities will be watching, excitedly to see, how having a Black owned bank in town might be able to help move the needle a little bit on some of these, problems that we've been facing for a long time.
Yeah, about 20 years ago, I chaired a statewide working group on minority business development, and we interviewed bankers. And one of the insights that came out from that meeting was that lending to our Alana communities, African, Latino, Asian, Native American, is an art and not a science. So that cultural intelligence, the relationships, the networks, the accessibility, all of them are, if you want to serve this market, and what this market that I've just got just a conservative estimate of a $16 billion market. That and a lot of this market is untapped because there are huge groups of people that are unbanked or not connected to the banking system. So I want to thank you for your time to spending here on AmericaTV.me and celebrating the first Black-owned bank. So that was helped get us a perspective on the access of capital and the challenges of access to capital and how unique strategies, culturally intelligent strategies such as Black-owned bank can make a difference in providing that access to capital. Um, Now I want to focus on the other story of the day, and that was a huge, I mean, the lowest unemployment rate in Minnesota, but at the same time, a black white gap in unemployment rates, and this gap is pretty huge. So, how do we explain this this unemployment gap, the higher unemployment rates among the Black community in Minnesota? And we had two panelists to offer some insights on what the challenge is and what could be the solution. So let's hear from two of our guests in a show that we recently had, Kemet Imatep from Street Intel and Emma Corey, from President CEO of Twin Cities Rise. So let me bring them on in a minute. Greetings and welcome to AmericaTV.me, powered by you. Thank you. Today we're going to deal with a very important question. Why the high unemployment rate for some in Minnesota? As you know, the Black unemployment rate is almost double the white unemployment rate. And here today, we have two guests who will share some insights into this. Emma Corey, President and CEO of Twin Cities Rise, and Kemet Imatep with Street Intel. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, how about sharing some background about yourself, Kemet?
Yes, it's an honor to be here with both of you. I was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota. I was heavy into the music game, drill team, music, percussion, working with young people at Inner City Youth League when I first started my nonprofit under Elder Kwame McDonald, rest his soul. Graduated from Central High School in class of 90 through the ALC, Area Learning Center, under Elder Mary K. Boyd. And then I went to the Almanac. I was chasing Miss Kim down for years and started writing. And then I became an underground journalist. So now I'm here with the Street Intel.
Thank you. Emma?
Fantastic. Thank you for having me, Bruce. Great to be here with Kemet. Emma Corey, President and CEO of Twin Cities Rise, an organization, small and mighty organization that serves those most disconnected and underserved in terms of being able to connect them to meaningful employment. So very important topic, and happy to be here.
So both of you have a lot of insight into this topic, and so I'd let you share your insights with the viewers. So go ahead, Emma, and start this conversation.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Kemet, it is really a pleasure to be here with you. You know, I've read some of your writing, and there is a raw sincerity to your writing when you look at underground news, as you call it, and something rings true. So tell me about street intelligence. What do you mean when you say street intel or street intelligence?
Yeah, thank you. That's an honor. I'm just excited. I really kind of don't know what to really woo-whoop at the moment because, you know, I got to try to be woo-whoop. But the professor helped me with to come up with the name of Street Intel, what I kind of like do. And what it is, I kind of have a thing that I say it's the place where the sun doesn't shine, where the shadow starts to hit. You can see the sun on the top, but when you start going down here, the sun don't hit down there. That's where Street Intel goes to. When Professor calls me with a different assignment, that something that you guys might be working on, I go right to the corridor where the people are at. I go at their jobs. I go in the club. I go in the bar. I go wherever they're at. If there's an organizational meeting, and I'll hit them right on the spot where it's raw and passionate. And then I just whoop it, and I just give the information up. So I think it's a raw cut piece of information where people usually wouldn't answer the question.
That's so powerful. That's so powerful because, again, organizations like mine are wanting to connect with those that truly need our services, right? And to be able to hear the perspective that you bring by your interviews is really worth its weight in gold, because then can we truly serve, because we know what our participants are dealing with and facing on a day-to-day basis. So, question for you, Kimet, based on the people that you interviewed and spoke with, we hear that there are all these jobs, right? We hear that there's full unemployment and there's more jobs than there are people. Yet, in our conversation, we go back many years now. You've been part of our family as a family friend, but the people you're talking to have a very different reality. Tell me, why the unemployment in our Black community, while there are all these jobs out there? What do you think it is?
What a heavy and wonderful question. And I don't really believe that one opinion or one idea is the issue. After doing this research for the last week and a half, it's so many different issues, Miss Emma. It's unbelievable. You don't even know where do I start. And we don't have the resources, the information, and some of the proper training how to get there. We still would deal with a lot of things that people don't want to really talk about. They don't want to talk about them, and until they do that, the gaps keep going. Because in that report, since 1972, it has been kind of like this, and that's deep to me. So I was only 1 year old, so that's a long time, right? So where do we go with that? So it's really challenging, and everybody that I interviewed was just really like kind of on the same thing. Like you just expressed, why is it like that? I'm speechless after what I researched.
Yeah,
you with me? I know it, but you can't talk about it. That's what's deep. Can't talk about it, Miss Emma, because if I do, but it's that deep.
I'm here, let's get to this. How do organizations like Twin Cities Rise connect with those you spoke to? How do we connect and get the trust of them that our organization wants to walk that journey with them and feel that pain with them, and perhaps see how they can help connect to resources that might help with the pain that might be there, or that is keeping folks from being able to move into a job that will pay for pay a family sustaining wage and will provide the dignity that you and I ask for when we walk into an employer, right? So how do we reach those that need our services, and how do we gain that trust?
Wow, Miss Emma, them is powerful questions. I'm like, whoa. Okay. So Twin Cities Rise is a deep organization that is needed. And I had some similar organizations that I participated in. And the things that Twin Cities Rise is doing right now that I research is beautiful. Helping us with our mentals first. Mentors first. And we don't have to get deep, but the programs that helped me, they dealt with some of them. They helped me without helping me knowing, but they helped me look at some of the things in me and how I was handling things emotionally. They assisted me with bus tokens, food, support. Like you said, I could just come to that place and sit there, which we can at Twin Cities Rise, get some coffee, take a load off, relax, take a deep breath. I could go to that place and do that. So those are ways that Twin Cities Rise would be able to help those that I interviewed, to help them. They could deal with some of the counselors that you have to work with them one-on-one and see what they really want to do. What do you do good? What don't you do good? Okay, let's focus on this. Then you guys have the resources with the employers, like we talked about in that meeting, that would love to work with Twin Cities Rise, that would help us, right? And then that would make me start to feel better. And the wages would increase, and I'll be doing something I love to do, and I feel like I'm contributing and I'm moving up. It does a whole 360. You with me? Start on a couple issues, but it does a 360.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what is your advice to employers? You know, there were some really interesting nuggets in that the interviews that you did. What are you and others that you talk to? What do you need from employers?
To have an understanding, especially in the times that we are in at this moment. Mm-hmm. You know, it's so intense. I mean, truth and honestly, we don't want to talk about it, but the racial discrimination and heavyweight that I feel, that they all feel. The people that I've interviewed, all of them, we all kind of gave a glimpse of that. The one interview when he said he's working below his potential, he said they work in the basement of this building. And the only time a white person comes, they think he's the supervisor because it's probably like Blacks, Latinos, Mexicans, Asians, or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's still going on, and we face that. So if you don't say the right thing or do the right thing, you're out of there. So if the job employers could just be more understanding of the different culture, ethnic backgrounds, have a little flexibility. You know, we can do the job. That's why we're here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. You know what I'm saying? If they could just have a little more flexibility, understanding, and allow us to grow with the company, I think that would be cool. Mm-hmm. Kind of take down some of the regular barriers. There's so many things.
That's what I'm hearing from you, Kemet, is pride, dignity, and understanding, flexibility, feeling seen, feeling heard in your place of work means more than or as much as compensation is what I think.
I mean, Ms. Emma, I would like to kind of apologize because I really, honestly, can't give an answer because I'm so emotional. Honestly, what I was blessed to come up and see these numbers and to see how this happens. I'm like just still like overwhelmed. I don't even know, like I was telling Professor that it was a blessing. This helped me, but it also allowed me to see some things that I never would have seen before. You with me? Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to express it at the moment. I'm probably going to need to get 2 weeks, and then maybe we can have another discussion in 2 weeks. Absolutely. I'll be a lot better. But right now, I'm like so emotional. Good, sad, hurt off of this, what we're talking about, because it's deep. I mean, and it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, I'm thankful for your Twin Cities Rise. Your organization is the most important organization right now that will be able to reach those that I interviewed, all of them. Twin Cities Rise right now.
Yeah.
So thanks,
Kemet.
Thank you, Kemet, and thank you, Emma, for providing some insight on why the high unemployment rate for some. We appreciate your street intel, and the conversations we had to show that there is a very complex picture, but a very important picture that needs to be addressed today as we think about solutions and how everyone can achieve this financial independence at a very and stable jobs and higher incomes. And those insights that cover many spectrums of work. So we will continue this conversation as you mentioned, because there are a lot more to talk about. But thank you both for spending this time with America. So we heard Kimet Imetep from Street Intel and Emma Corey from President and CEO of Twin City Rise talk about perspectives on disparities in unemployment, especially the black-white disparities in unemployment, and what can be done about it, and the urgency of now. Uh, we next we focus on the legislature and tune into some of the conversations and negotiations happening at the legislature. We are blessed in Minnesota to have a surplus that is between 9 and 12 billion now. If you look at the biennium, and it is probably a once in a lifetime opportunity for that amount of surplus in our budget, and it provides an opportunity to do something in terms of long-term investments in the ALANA BIPOC communities to help address these disparities in capital, disparities in unemployment, disparities in housing. And so, what can be done about it? First, to provide a perspective on the ALANA, the ethnic economy, I want to offer some research and data, and then perspectives on the E12, the higher ed, the jobs and economic development committees, um, and what can we do about it. Welcome to AmericaTV.me, powered by you. Thank you. Today, the news of the hour is the breaking news is that there's a budget deal, a framework for a budget deal, but the question is the budget deal for whom? In particular, how is this budget deal going to impact the African, Latino, Asian, and Native American communities in Minnesota, the ALANA communities in Minnesota, this $1.4 trillion economy in Minnesota? So, in perspective, let's look at the budget deal first. Um, of this $9.3 billion, $2 billion has already been allocated with a significant chunk to frontline workers. And that's good because a lot of ALANA workers are frontline workers and to pay a heavy price during the pandemic. And it's good to invest back into them. Uh, the other areas is $4 billion allocated to some kind of tax relief. The contours we don't know. So in context, we have to remember that the ALANA communities contribute $3 billion in taxes every year. So we'd like to see benefits, tax relief going directly to the ALANA communities too. $1 billion going into E12 education, $1 billion to health and human services, 450 million into public safety and judiciary, 1.3 billion still not allocated, and $1.4 billion in terms of the bonding bill. So in context, how can we look at uh, this bill, this framework of this budget deal from the perspective of the ALANA communities? So may I suggest that the ALANA population is about 20% of Minnesota's people. So it's reasonable to ask that we invest 20% of the current budget surplus into long term wealth building tools and resources of the community. And this implies that about $1 billion could go to Alana Business and Workforce, and another billion could go into um, Alana Youth. So let me provide some more context to this. So if you just take Alana Businesses as a group, they help create about $7 billion of goods and services all across Minnesota. And they these businesses pay about $1.5 billion in annual payroll and employing over 60,000 workers. As a group, these businesses will be one of the largest employers. And this entrepreneurship, the spirit of entrepreneurship is very vibrant. You can see it in the cultural malls and the high-tech corridors. And it would be, but one of the challenges is they tend to be smaller in size, and with the right investment, they can grow and employ more people, create more jobs, create more wealth. But in order for that to happen, we need different kinds of capital. We need product development, marketing, access to contracts, uh, investment in land banks and in commercial land trusts, and so on, that would help tools and resources that could jumpstart this vibrant economy. On the other side, we have the workers. And these Alana workers, they help produce almost $200 billion in goods and services across Minnesota and help support about 1 million jobs, as well as pay about $24 billion in taxes, this economy that they help create. So they are a very vibrant force in the Minnesota economy across, especially in certain sectors. And Minnesota is facing a very serious challenge, and that is the aging of the workforce. In all many critical sectors of the Minnesota economy, the percentage of people 55 years and older and approaching retirement is really large. And Alana workers are beginning to move in those areas. And in order for them to be more effective in especially new sectors, they need investment in skilling and reskilling, in career pathways to better jobs. And this requires dedicated investment in the Alana workforce. Then we look at the youth, Alana youth. Eat well education is good, and kinds of things that need to be done, especially mental health recently. But the youth in the higher ed area also need to be given attention because they contribute about $1 billion of their own money in their education. And so it may be reasonable to say that what if we took just 10% of what they contributed themselves into the education system and give it back to them in a better infrastructure of affordable education, support services, a cultural, intelligent learning environment, uh, uh, graduation rates, timely graduation, uh, pathways to successful careers, especially in the new economy, the digital economy, and other critical STEM areas. And so we have to remember that this group of youth, Alana youth, they represent a $1.5 trillion talent. And if we invest in them wisely today, we are going to be a very productive, very competitive, very innovative, creative economy of the future. So it is important today as we to step back and to invest in long-term infrastructure tools and resources that will invest and grow this 1.5 trillion, $4 trillion economy in Minnesota. And I hope our leaders will step back and do the right thing today. Um, So that provided a context on why community leaders are asking for the $2 billion long-term trust fund that will build wealth in the Alana communities. Unfortunately, in the legislature, the existing bills in areas like higher ed and um, jobs and economic development, there's only about 20 million in the higher ed agreement, and 11 million in the jobs and workforce development for the entire state. So to let's look at some perspectives on each of these areas and why we might need more investment in these areas. Let's begin first with looking at higher ed. Sorry for that little delay in let me on the playback. So I'm going to put that on right now, the conversation around higher ed. As we approach the end of the legislative session, what's happening in terms of investment in the $1.5 trillion portfolio of our African, Latino, Asian, and Native American students? What I mean by that is if we take all the youth in school and the university system today, and if all of them get a BA degree, their lifetime earning would be $1.5 trillion. And the college students currently in the system right now, uh, an estimate is that they put in at least $1 billion in their own money on annual tuition payments. So it's a significant portfolio of investment before the legislature. They are stewards of this very important resource. And in testimony to the legislature, I identified 4 areas that make up a comprehensive strategy in higher education investment. First is affordability. The second is a multi-tiered support system. The third area is a culturally intelligent environment, learning environment, and shared governance. um, and and the fourth area is a focus on academic outcomes and career outcomes at a disaggregated level. So, where are we in the legislature today as we seek investments in growing this 1.5 trillion ALANA talent pool in Minnesota? Joining me today is our guest, uh, Letower, Dr. John Peterson, who's also been following things in the legislature quite closely. Welcome to America TV. Me, Dr. Letower, Dr. Peterson.
Thank you, Dr. Corey. Fafta Leatua Manwia. Greetings and blessings to everyone out there watching the feed. Thank you for having me here today, Bruce. I really appreciate it.
Could you share a little bit about your interest in what's going on at the legislature in higher education?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm a educator by background. Both of my parents were teachers. I was a teacher for a number of years, as well as an administrator. Most of my experience was in K-12, although I do have some experience in higher education as well. Over the last few years, through my business, TE2 Consulting, I've been working with a variety of clients, one of which is the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership, and helping to guide, coordinate, and at some level lead reforms in higher education that create greater equity for all students, and more specifically, people of color, Indigenous, ALANA, BIPOC students. At the legislature, we've been seeing quite a few different things. We do have, as folks know, a split legislature here in Minnesota. But we're not here today to be partisan and play partisan politics. More than anything else, we're here to talk a little bit about some of the proposals and provide a little deeper dive into some of the analytics associated with the fiscal policy and then the public policy in the current omnibus bill.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. When I look at the current omnibus bill before the legislature, I see some investments in each of these areas, whether it's from the House side or the Senate side. So I'm looking at the totality of the bill, of that omnibus bill. So in affordability, I see tuition scholarships for American Indian students. I see state grant program, some focus on increasing the grant program. In support services, I see some investments in mental health services. In the cultural environment area, I see some investments in the Teachers of Color program, and the Office of Higher Education has a very consistent focus on outcomes. So at a broad level, I see some coverage in all these areas. What's your more in-depth look at what's going on?
Yeah, I think at a broad level, we really have to ask ourselves, not only this session, but in future sessions, what does a complete and comprehensive investment look like as it pertains to the state overall total budget comparative to what needs to be invested in higher education? And so the $1.5 trillion lifetime earnings, what sort of an investment is needed on the state side to be combined with the $1 billion in annual tuition payments to ensure that we get the results that we need for Minnesota to continue to be a vibrant destination state and area for people to come and live and work and enjoy life. So I have some questions about just the overall investment strategy on the state side. However, with that said, as you mentioned, Bruce, the omnibus bill that's currently in conference committee that the conferees, the representatives and senators and chairs are talking about, does touch on each of these four different buckets that you have listed on the screen. One of the areas that I believe is incredibly important is investing in the state grant aid program, and that relates to fiscal policy. I'm a firm believer that whenever you have public policy, you have to back it up with some sort of a fiscal note in order for it to have both the support and the accountability teeth in it to make it really stick and work for students. And so I think that the 2-point reduction in the student responsibility is a smart move for the state of Minnesota, partisan politics aside. At one time, the state grant aid was not a 50-50 split. It was actually 48 on the student side and 52% on the state side. And so that was erased back about 15, 20 years ago. And now I think it's time for us to kind of move in a different direction with that. So I definitely support that aspect of the bill. And I believe that is in on the House language in terms of the side-by-side comparative of the two proposals. On the Senate side, I absolutely support, from a support services and also from an academic and career outcomes perspective, the notification process that's proposed in the Senate bill, stating that when a student hits a certain score on an assessment like the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment in college and career, potentially the reading and math assessments for the MTAs, possibly the SAT, the ACT. I'm of the opinion that students who hit a certain standardized benchmark score on any of those assessments should be exempted from having to take developmental education courses, what used to be called remedial education. And so what's happened in Minnesota is that in 2015, a bill was passed stating that very fact. Unfortunately, in the last 7 years, we haven't seen as many students avail themselves of that exemption because they're unaware of it. And their counselors in the secondary schools are unaware of it in many cases as well. And so one of the provisions that's in the bill in the Senate side is that institutions like colleges and universities are obligated to notify students that they're exempted from having to take developmental education. This will have a very positive benefit for students. One, we believe that GPA and a multiple measured approach in terms of assessment is a better indicator of future success in gateway college courses like math and English. And we also know that developmental education credits do not result in any credits toward graduation. And sometimes what happens is students end up spending money on those developmental education credits and they run out of state granted funds before they can graduate. All right, so I want to be very clear, I'm not anti-developmental education. I know that developmental education is very beneficial in many instances. And so one of the things that I support is co-requisite remedial, where you take a developmental education course or a support course in addition to a gateway course in math and or English. So without getting into the details too much, those are two areas that I think cross-cut a couple of these different buckets that I fully support.
So since that conversation on higher ed, new agreements or new targets for the higher ed bill was much lower, and a lot of those 4 areas were even pared down even more. And that is something that is of concern, given the fact that ALANA students pay about $1 billion of their own money on their education, and can't we invest back at least 10% of what the students themselves put in the hard-earned money into those 4 environments of youth? And so that's a concern, and I hope can still be addressed before the legislative session ends. I had a conversation when we tracked the E12 conference committee meeting yesterday, and so let's get a perspective of what was happening there in a minute.
The other senators who are joining us via Zoom at this busy time. A question was raised by Senate staff about line 27 on the
the Republicans are back now. They're out of recess.
So welcome everybody. This is AmericaTV.me, powered by you. We are tracking the Minnesota Legislature E12 Conference Committee session that's going on live right now. And with me is Dr. John Peterson, who's been tracking some issues. Dr. Peterson, could you give us an update? What you've been, what's some progress here?
Yeah, so what I can tell you folks is that originally the Senate target the proposal that they had put out prior to the conference committee really starting was $30 million for a literacy program. I think it's called Bold Literacy. The House had put together a much more comprehensive package of proposals. On Monday, the governor, the majority leader, and the speaker struck a deal and set the target for E12 at $1 billion. And so what's been happening over the past 4 days is that the Senate and the House have been trying to come to a point of compromise about how to spend that $1 billion. And so one of the big pieces that is an area of focus is addressing the special education cross subsidy, which we know in Minnesota is very high. We do not allocate enough resources to school districts to pay for the costs of special education. And then another key piece that MNEEP has been involved in heavily is the funding of English learners. Students who speak English as a second language. And so we've seen a significant investment in the proposal over the next 2 years for both special education cross subsidy and EL cross subsidy. There are also significant supports for mental health needs for students in E12, as well as a number of provisions that address culturally responsive learning, in addition to the literacy pieces.
So it looks like the House, the committee is ready to start again. And anything else that you, what about a little while ago, there was some testimony about mental health needs of our youth. And can you give us an update what happened there?
Yeah, so, there's pretty strong bipartisan agreement that we need to do a better job of funding schools and districts to provide for the mental health needs of students in E12. And I don't remember the specific targets that they set, but they did put in a proposal to help bolster the amount of support based on a funding perspective that local education agencies will receive as a result of state funding for mental health. I know that there have been visits to various mental health collaboratives that are in schools, like Minneapolis Edison High School. I know that the commissioner and the governor recently visited that school. So just generally, just needing to recognize that coming out of this pandemic and pre-pandemic, that the mental health needs of students are as yet still very much undiagnosed and unmet. And this seeks to address that.
Have you been tracking the Teachers of Color legislation or the request?
I have. I believe that proposal in the House offer is around $8 million for teachers of color investments. There's a number of investments that are kind of in that same arena. I don't remember exactly what they are. I have a copy of the spreadsheet, but I don't have it pulled up in front of me. Obviously they went through a list of the budget targets and allocations for each of these different areas. Another piece that they're talking about pretty significantly is MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support.
Yeah.
And there is funding in there as well. And they're also talking about transportation sparsity, especially as it relates to rural Minnesota. So increasing.
Negotiations in the E12 continues today with some new proposals coming out from the Senate, and we will continue to monitor the situation to see where do these investments in E12 learning finally end up. And just a reminder that our youth, ALANA BIPOC youth in the school and university system, if all of them achieved a 4-year bachelor's degree, their talent pool of lifetime earnings is about $1.5 trillion. So that's the portfolio that our leaders are negotiating partly about in terms of what kind of investments can be made or need to be made in this $1.5 trillion pool of potential future workers. And this is another of our focus points of community leaders tied to this request to the governor and legislatures for a $2 billion fund, trust fund. I had two other guests join in to talk about, three other guests to about the um, need for this dedicated resources, long-term resources, and I'll share their perspective now. They are Brett Buckner of 1mn.org, John Yang of the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, and Anastasia Belladonna Carrera of Common Cause. We'll have them down in a minute. Greetings and welcome to AmericaTV.me, powered by you. Today, we are going to talk about a very important development as the Minnesota legislature approaches its final days and hours. There's a budget deal on, and we are concerned about the failure for long-term investment in the ALANA African, Latino, Asian, Native American communities. And so to give us some perspective, I first have Anastasia Belladonna Carrera. She is the executive director of Common Cause Minnesota. Anastasia, could you give us a brief overview of what's going on? What's the final deal looking like in terms of money?
Yeah, so there's a lot of activity happening this week on our Capitol campus. I'm sure many people have heard, perhaps through their social media or even during the regular news castings here on television or radio. But on Monday, the governor, as well as the House Speaker, Melissa Hortman, and the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Miller, they came upon an agreement. And that agreement is super important because what it does is that it sets the parameters for how much it is that each of these major areas are going to have in spending. So like higher education, what's going to be, the budget there, the supplemental budget there. Same thing for public safety, state government and elections, even like our investments in our natural spaces, right? Environmental stuff. So it's really important. This week is like crunch time. Much like we have our own budgets in our households, the state government is the same thing, right? They have so much money in revenue, so much expenses that they're going to have, and so much that they want to put away in savings. And I just want to make sure that we kind of see it that way as we're going to be going through these numbers. And the numbers can sometimes become super overwhelming. But it's really just important to know that just like our households, right, we don't want to spend more money than with revenues, than the money that we're bringing into our own households, right? And it's the same thing with states. So let's talk about what some of those targets were this week. So this week, these three individuals brokered an agreement that essentially divides $9 billion, historic amount of money, into the various projects and programs and what have you through the surplus, and also saves a little bit of money, right? So it sounds familiar, right? That's the same way we do our own household budgets. Let's talk about those. The broad agreement in spending the $9 billion of surplus goes around more or less in the following way. They've agreed to include $4 billion for new spending, right? And another $4 billion is going to be spent through taxes and tax breaks, right? It leaves a bottom line of about $4.1 billion that should go to making sure that our own economy is protected, in the sense that if something goes wrong, Minnesota will still have $4.1 billion in its coffers and its savings to be able to make up for those unexpected turns in our economy, right? Whether it's inflation or any kind of other impact on our broader economy. And so, much like our own households, right? We have our expenses, we have our savings, and we have those revenues that come in. Now, what does that mean for us specifically? There was an agreement that earmarked $1 billion of the 9 for E through 12 education, okay? And another $1 billion for health and human services. There was another chunk of money, $450 million, that was reserved for public safety. And that's certainly an area that many, many people care deeply about, regardless of what side of the police reforming issues that you land on. There's another $1.4 billion that was earmarked for bonding. And that bonding is really just, essentially just think about the roads, fixing state buildings, creating, reinforcing our bridges and that infrastructure and things like that. So there is, interestingly enough, this is a new development. Interestingly enough, I just found out today that there's $1.32 billion that was left for other areas that the leaders agreed to. So think of like pet projects, right? So they put aside $1.32 billion. That's a lot of money that they're going to allocate to like their own pet projects as they agree to between now and the end of the legislative session this Sunday at midnight. Is formally signing
just to come and pick up from there. So out of $9 billion, $2 billion was spent already on unemployment insurance, and $500 million went to frontline workers. And a lot of the frontline workers are ALANA, who got workers who were hit hard during the pandemic. And so, but they have to apply to get it. So of the rest of the money, they have put $4 billion aside, and then what you talked about. So now in these committees, when you look at that spreadsheet, there's practically not a whole lot of money in these key committees. Like when you look at jobs, it's only about 11 million for everybody, and for 20 million for higher ed, and down the line. So I want to get some perspectives on this, because right from the House Select Committee on Racial Justice, that made the case that the state should invest at least $1 billion in wealth-building infrastructure of the ALANA communities, ALANA BIPOC communities. But now we are seeing numbers like 11 million and 20 million for everyone. So I want to get a little perspective on that. I want to bring in John Yang, who is the president of the Monk Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us, John.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dr. Bruce. But yeah, just going over the numbers, 11 million is really low to invest in the jobs committee. And, our businesses and organization, we serve the community, right? So it's very important that we continue to help support the businesses and organizations that serve the community. So, we need to learn why the BIPOC or ALANA community is have such high employment rate. Why does the number of owners for minority businesses compared to the rest in Minnesota? It's only about 9%. I was looking at the most recent census, and the population for the minority BIPOC, we make up about 20% of the population in Minnesota. So there's a kind of like disparity between the businesses and our community, right? I mean, we would like to see the number of businesses be almost around the number of population, around 20%. So right now we're at about 9% for the state of Minnesota. So it's important for us to really focus and have the state focus on helping our businesses and organizations so that we can help better serve the community. So, and just to figure, we have to know why there's such a high unemployment rate, why there are poverty. So we need these programs and services and businesses to serve our community. So that's why it's so important to really emphasize that, because you can give someone money, but when the money's gone, if you don't have programs to support them and for them to navigate and learn and change the changing environment in terms of digital marketing, for example, if you don't adapt to the changing environment, you're still going to be where you're at when you first started after the money's gone. So it's important for us to have these services and programs to help navigate the businesses so they can continue to grow through economic development and growth.
So in context, what the ALANA BIPOC businesses, they produce about $7 billion worth of goods and services in Minnesota. They employ about 60,000 workers, making them as a collective one of the largest employers. They also pay about $1.5 billion in annual payroll. So they're a powerful engine of economic growth. And we've been asking for a $1 billion investment in workforce and business development to build up the capacity of the businesses to grow, because they tend to be smaller and also have been hit hard during COVID. So in the area of workforce too, we find that the ALANA workers, they are playing a critical role with the aging of the Minnesota population. There's huge segments of the population over 55 years old, and who's going to play that role of the next generation of workforce, but yet we don't see long-term investments in the workforce in Minnesota. So I want to bring in Brett Buckner into the conversation. Brett is the managing director of 1mn.org. Brett, what's your perspective on the latest budget negotiations?
Well, and thanks again for Dr. Corey for having us on this important conversation. Unfortunately, we don't invest in the future. We normally will do things such as think about how the world is sustaining itself right now, and to think about those who already have, as opposed to how do we invest for the future with people who need to have. And so I think what John has said before, it is pretty important. When that money runs out, you literally stall the potential of an economy. So our hopes, and again, this is where representation comes in very, very importantly, that when you don't have enough voices over there to push the power conversation to see beyond what we are used to doing, that's when we lose out. The reality is that the future of Minnesota is not with certain populations, it's with communities of color, Black, brown, etc. And we have to do a much better job of having that conversation about where we need to be and where we're going, as opposed to maintaining the days of Wendell Anderson, when we said that Minnesota was the exceptional, the good life was taking place here. So we have to rearrange and we have to retool.
We were having this conversation a little earlier, and a storm came by and knocked everybody's power and with hail, and Dr. John Peterson was with us, and he had a perspective on higher ed, because in the higher ed bill, there's only 20 million, yet our ALANA students contribute $1 billion every year in tuition, but we're not reinvesting back in them in 4 critical areas in affordable education, like the state grant program, or tuition, free college, and in the supportive environment, support services, and culturally intelligent learning environment, and career paths to good majors that give them jobs. No investment. What would 20 million do in this situation of a growing economy, a shortage in the Minnesota labor force? So this focus on the immediate and not the long term is concerning. And so we've we've asked. There's a petition floating, moving around the community that has got a lot of support, and this petition basically asks for the state to take, as John said, we are 20% of the population of Minnesota, put 20% of the surplus into a trust fund, $2 billion that will be long-term investments in business, workforce, and youth. What do you have any comments about that concept?
I think it's a smart and prudent investment. I know, Dr. Corey, you have made it very clear on several of the studies, several of the reports that an investment, the multiplier effect, a dollar within our communities yields X. And I forget the numbers right off the top of my head, but the reality is that if we're investing into our future, if we're thinking about how, and it's not just the economic growth, it's the issue of public safety, it's the public health, it's the actual development of society and community from there. So it has, when you start taking in all the issues of the economy, it has so much more potential than trying to maintain what we're doing. So I don't know why this is even being debated, in St. Paul at times. But we do know that as we have our calls for action and for investment, there are other parts of the society. Greater Minnesota continues to say, that if you invest, the state's going to grow, at a certain rate. That in exurbs and suburbs, that they don't have enough money. And again, it goes right back to the whole thing of when is enough enough? I don't think we really understand what $1 billion is in the grand scheme of things and how we can really invest it. A lot of people kind of get flummoxed when we get to 100 million. Multiply from there. The reality is that I don't think we're being smart with the investments and trying to set our society up for long-term investment and opportunity in order to placate during the political year, during the election year, our usual voters. So I think that's also what's stalling the conversation as well.
So as we wrap up, here is the petition that is going to that has been signed by a number of community leaders for the governor and legislative leaders to take of the $4 billion that is put away, take $2 billion, put it in a trust fund for long-term wealth building of the ALANA communities. So any last minute, last words that you might have to wrap up this conversation? Let's start with, I know everybody is monitoring the sessions that are going on right now. So Anastasia, you're doing a great job keeping us updated. So you can have the last word, and if you need to leave.
I really encourage, thank you, Dr. Corey, first of all, for creating these spaces and opportunities for those of us that are, at the forefront of some of these spaces to get back to community, because that's so important. I will invite anyone watching this to please, no matter when you see this video or this live stream, please reach out to your elected officials and have that conversation, right? Have the conversation around, what did you do that I can look at that shows me you supported investment in our communities? And don't, make that ask regardless of what party it is, regardless of how much you may like the candidate. Make that question known. Have them lay that out for you, and more importantly, send you the information that you can look at that informs you of what those efforts look like. Because this is movement building, right? This isn't just a one shot and you're done. This is literally laying an infrastructure for movement building that gets us in that direction.
And thank you very much, Anastasia, for all your selfless work, putting all kinds of hours to keep us community empowered for the vote as well as policy. John, any last thoughts?
Yes, so the petition is good, but I'd like to see ALANA coalition created so all our organization business can come together. And when we go lobby. We could just go directly to the governor, right? And we can represent the whole minority ALANA group. So I think that's important on top of a petition. That's even stronger when we come together. So let's continue to have this conversation and let's make it happen, because if we're talking about this, we have to actually take action and make it happen. So, if anyone wants to volunteer and create that coalition, I'm willing to support too. So let's think about that.
That coalition already exists. We call it the ALANA Brain Trust, and Brett is also involved with it. And we have a statewide network. So you're right. Let's
so we need to sign up.
Convene it back again and push forward with the momentum because we are a nonpartisan, multi-ethnic coalition statewide, focusing on policy issues. Brett, any closing word? You just heard John Yang, president of the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, great Asian business summit that you recently hosted, the chamber hosted in Metro State. Thanks for that energy. Brett?
Call your legislator, tell them this investment yields a lot more benefit and bang for buck, that communities of color, people of color, we are in all 87 counties. So it's not going to miss anybody, but we have to be realistic and also opportunistic. That what's the biggest bang for our buck, as relates to digital economy, high med tech, other places of that nature. It is within the unique area, and also people forget we're able to reach multiple countries across the globe because of our connections from there.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you for your work with Cease to Harvest, getting all the young people engaged and motivated with the summer games that are coming up. Continue to keep us in the loop. We'll have you back here on America TV to talk about it. And I know you've got a couple of other things on the hopper we'll talk about in the later. So Brett Buckner, 1mn.org. Thank you very much. So we heard from a perspective, a panel of community leaders, John Yang, Hmong Chamber of Commerce, Anastasia Belladonna Carrera, Common Cause Minnesota, and Brett Buckner, 1mn.org, talking about the urgency of now and the need to engage with our elected leaders right now as decisions are being made, to ask them to ensure that there's these long-term investments in wealth building in the ALANA BIPOC communities in order to have for everyone, the economy to work for everyone. There is a petition, as I mentioned, that is on that you could sign up for, and I'll show you the location of that. So if you go to empoweringstrategies.org, we have this petition that's out there. The letter that went to Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, Speaker Hortman, and Senator Miller, and to ask them to allocate $2 billion of the $4 billion that's kept aside to this long-term fund that will help build long-term wealth building in the communities, and the rationale why the $1.4 trillion ALANA economy needs this investment today, the urgency of now, and community leaders who signed on to this petition and continue to sign on this website as people are added. Empoweringstrategies.org is where you'll find this petition, but you don't have to come here. You can call and write or connect your legislators right now as they are discussing and debating the future of Minnesota today. So come to the end of this session. the race for equity, the urgency of now. We started off with that race for equity in early morning at Como Park. Many people gathered to run a race for equity to bring visibility to the urgency of now. And we went through different the case for investment in the ALANA BIPOC communities, the newspaper attention that's highlighted these days on access to capital and the unemployment gap and the gaps in housing and affordability, and how long-term investments are needed to build wealth in this community. So thank you all for listening on this session of America TV.me, powered by you, with you. Let's create a world, an America that works for everybody and where everybody can see themselves in the policies, the programs, institutions that make up our community. So have a great Minnesota day and keep track of the legislature. There's just a few hours left, and our voice and your voice are going to make a difference. Thank you.